What's the real reason your bank account never seems to grow, no matter what you try? Think about it for a moment. You've read the books, followed the advice, maybe even hired a financial coach. You track every penny, you've cut out the lattes and the streaming services, you work longer hours than ever before. And yet, here you are, still struggling, still stressed, still wondering if you'll ever experience true financial freedom. The question isn't whether you're trying hard enough. The question is, are you fighting the right battle? Most people spend their entire lives treating money problems like they're purely mathematical. Add more income here, subtract more expenses there, balance the equation, and everything should work out. But what if that's exactly why nothing changes? What if the numbers are just symptoms of something far deeper, something operating beneath the surface that you can't see on a spreadsheet? Florence Scovel Shinn understood this over 100 years ago. While everyone around her was obsessed with practical strategies and conventional wisdom, she was exploring territory that most people didn't even know existed. She wasn't a banker or an economist. She was a mystic, a teacher, someone who dared to ask the uncomfortable questions that nobody else was asking. And through years of careful observation and study, she uncovered a stunning truth. The invisible world shapes the visible one. Your spiritual state directly creates your material circumstances. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This sounds too abstract, too out there to actually help with real bills and real debt. But here's what's fascinating. The people who applied her teachings didn't just see small improvements, they experienced complete reversals. Debt that had suffocated them for decades suddenly dissolved. Opportunities appeared out of nowhere. Money flowed in from directions they never anticipated. Has this ever happened to you? You get a raise at work, feel that brief moment of relief, and then, almost immediately, an expense you never saw coming eats up every extra dollar. It's like there's an invisible force draining away everything you managed to accumulate. And you're right, there is. Florence Scovel Shinn called it the law of attraction, but not in the watered-down way you've probably heard it explained. She wasn't talking about vision boards and affirmations. She was talking about a fundamental spiritual law as reliable as gravity, one that governs how abundance or lack manifests in your experience. And she discovered a specific practice rooted in ancient wisdom that allows you to work with this law instead of against it. What you're about to discover might challenge everything you've been taught about money. It might seem too simple to be true, but sometimes the most powerful solutions are the ones hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone ready to see them. And the fact that you're here, right now, reading these words, might not be the accident you think it is. Stay with me, because we're about to explore why your financial struggles might have less to do with your income and more to do with forces you didn't even know were at work. And once you understand how these forces operate, here's where most people get stuck, and it's not their fault. We've been conditioned from childhood to believe that success is a simple formula. Work hard, save diligently, make smart choices, and prosperity will follow. It's the narrative that gets repeated in every self-help book, every financial seminar, every motivational speech. And there's truth in it. Effort matters, discipline matters. But if that were the whole story, wouldn't everyone who works hard be wealthy? Wouldn't every person who budgets and sacrifices eventually break through? The uncomfortable reality is that you probably know people who barely try and somehow always land on their feet financially. Meanwhile, you're exhausted from the constant grind, and still, the breakthrough never comes. That's not a moral failing on your part. It's evidence that something else is at play here, something that operates beyond the realm of hustle and strategy. Florence Scovel Shinn saw this pattern everywhere she looked. Good people, hard-working people, people who did everything right according to conventional wisdom, yet they remained trapped in financial limitation. And then there were others, sometimes less educated, sometimes less experienced, who seemed to attract opportunity effortlessly. The difference wasn't intelligence or work ethic. The difference was alignment with a spiritual principle that most people don't even know exists. Think about the timing of your financial setbacks. Really examine the pattern. You're about to make progress. You can feel momentum building. And then, bam, something derails it. Your phone breaks. Your landlord raises the rent. A family member needs help. It's uncanny how these obstacles appear at the exact moment you're gaining ground, isn't it? What if that's not random chaos? What if there's an invisible current running beneath your financial life, and until you learn to navigate it, you'll keep getting pulled under no matter how hard you swim? Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of these transformative teachings. This is a journey toward the abundance already prepared for you. This is the hidden truth that changes everything. Your money problems aren't primarily about money. They're about frequency, about resonance, about the unseen patterns that shape what shows up in your visible world. Every thought you think, every belief you carry about what you deserve or what's possible for someone like you, these aren't just abstract ideas floating harmlessly in your mind. They're creative forces, actively constructing the reality you experience tomorrow. Now I want to go even deeper into this revelation, because understanding the mechanics of how this actually works is what separates people who hear spiritual teachings and forget them from people whose lives genuinely transform. When Florence Scovel Shinn talked about the spiritual laws governing abundance, she wasn't being poetic or philosophical. She was describing something as real and measurable as the law of gravity, except this operates in a dimension most of us never look at. Your external circumstances, the balance in your account, the opportunities that come or don't come, the unexpected expenses that always seem to arrive. These are mirror reflections of your internal landscape. And that internal landscape has been shaped by years, sometimes generations, of conditioning that you didn't consciously choose. Write in the comments, "I'm ready to see what I've been missing." What Florence Scovel Shinn discovered wasn't a trick or a technique you manipulate to get what you want. It was something far more profound, a doorway into a principle that's been documented in sacred texts for thousands of years, but somehow got buried under layers of religious ritual and forgotten meaning. She found that certain ancient words, when understood correctly and spoken with genuine alignment, don't just express hope. They activate a shift in the unseen architecture of your life. The specific practice she taught centers around Psalm 112. And before you dismiss this as something you've heard before or scroll past thinking it's just another religious platitude, let me tell you what actually happens when people engage with this text the way she instructed. These aren't stories passed down through generations that might or might not be true. These are documented accounts from people in our time, people who were drowning in circumstances that felt completely hopeless. There was a woman who'd been fighting foreclosure for 2 years. She'd exhausted every option the financial system offered: loan modifications, payment plans, consultations with attorneys. Nothing worked. The bank had set a date, and she was weeks away from losing the home where she'd raised her children. Then someone introduced her to this practice. Within days, not months, not years, the entire situation reversed. A buyer appeared who wanted to purchase the property at a price that cleared her debt and left her with enough to start fresh. The timing was impossible to explain through normal channels. Or consider the man buried under medical debt from an unexpected surgery. No insurance, bills exceeding 6 figures, collection agencies calling constantly. He'd resigned himself to bankruptcy as the only way out. But after applying what Florence Scovel Shinn taught about Psalm 112, something shifted. An administrative review uncovered errors in the billing. A charity fund he didn't know existed covered a substantial portion. The remaining balance was negotiated down to an amount he could actually manage. None of this was his doing in the conventional sense. He didn't hire lawyers or fight the system. He simply aligned himself with a different frequency, and reality reorganized itself around that alignment. These transformations aren't outliers. They're the pattern that emerges when someone stops trying to force outcomes through sheer effort and instead learns to work with the invisible currents that shape all material circumstances. The impact ripples beyond just the money itself. Marriages that were crumbling under financial stress find solid ground again. Children who'd been absorbing their parents' anxiety suddenly thrive. Entire family systems break free from generations of limitation. What you're witnessing in these stories isn't luck or coincidence. It's what happens when the hidden mechanics of abundance finally get understood and applied. And here's what might surprise you most. The practice itself is remarkably simple. It doesn't require hours of your day or complicated rituals, but it does require a shift in how you've been approaching the whole question of provision and prosperity. Put down in the comments, "I believe transformation is possible for me." The beauty of what Florence Scovel Shinn taught is that it cuts through all the noise and complexity we've been told is necessary for spiritual practice. There's no requirement for hours of meditation, no need for special equipment or expensive courses, no complicated rituals you have to perform perfectly or risk losing the benefit. In fact, the moment you start thinking you need to do more, add more, complicate it further, you've already moved away from the core principle. This works precisely because of its simplicity, not in spite of it. What's required is something different from effort. It's understanding. It's grasping how the invisible world operates and then aligning yourself with that operation instead of working against it. Most people approach their financial problems like they're wrestling an opponent, throwing all their strength and willpower at something they're trying to force into submission. But what if the real power comes from learning to move with a current that's already flowing, one that's been there all along, waiting for you to stop fighting and start cooperating? The discipline isn't about doing more. It's about consistency with the right thing. Speaking life over your situation once each day with genuine conviction creates a momentum that builds on itself in ways you can't manufacture through sheer volume. It's the difference between scattering seeds randomly across hard ground and planting one seed properly in prepared soil and tending it faithfully. The harvest doesn't come from how many seeds you threw, but from the one you actually cultivated. Here's what most people don't realize when they first approach this work. Your financial struggle isn't actually about the decisions you made last year or the debt you accumulated 5 years ago. Those are symptoms. The real issue lives deeper, in patterns that have been running in the background of your life for so long, you don't even notice them anymore. Some of these patterns you inherited, they were operating in your parents' lives, your grandparents' lives, passed down like invisible blueprints that dictate what's possible and what isn't. Have you ever noticed how certain families seem to share the same financial story across multiple generations? Different circumstances, different eras, but the same underlying theme of struggle and limitation? That's not genetic, and it's not about education or opportunity. It's a spiritual pattern, a frequency that gets transmitted from one generation to the next unless someone consciously interrupts it. And interrupting it doesn't require you to fix everyone who came before you, or even to fully understand every twist and turn of how the pattern developed. You just need to step into a different alignment yourself, and the pattern breaks. This is why addressing symptoms never produces lasting change. You can pay off every debt, clear every balance, start with a clean slate, and if the underlying pattern isn't shifted, you'll find yourself right back where you started within a few years. The circumstances will look different, but the experience will be eerily familiar. What Florence Scovel Shinn understood is that true transformation happens at the root level, in the invisible realm where these patterns first take shape before they ever manifest as numbers in your bank account. Type in the comments, "The pattern breaks with me." When people first encounter Psalm 112, most of them read it the same way they'd read any other passage, scanning the words, appreciating the sentiment, maybe feeling a moment of inspiration, and then moving on. But Florence Scovel Shinn insisted that this completely misses the point. The words themselves aren't magical formulas that work just by being repeated. The power lives in the revelation, in suddenly seeing what those ancient phrases actually mean for your specific life right now. It's the difference between reading a map and understanding the territory. One gives you information, the other gives you orientation. This is where most people stumble without even realizing it. They treat sacred texts like decoration, beautiful, meaningful perhaps, but ultimately separate from the practical reality of bills and bank statements. They never make the connection between the spiritual principle being described and the actual mechanism that's keeping them trapped. So they read the words, they might even say them aloud, but nothing shifts because there's no recognition happening, no moment where the truth penetrates beyond the surface level of their thinking. What you need to grasp is that these words are describing a reality that already exists, not creating something new. Abundance isn't something you're trying to conjure into being through sheer force of will or positive affirmations. It's already flowing, already available, like a river that's been there all along. The question is whether you're positioned to receive it or whether something is blocking your access. And that's where the real work happens. Not in trying harder, but in identifying and dismantling what's in the way. Debt operates as more than a financial burden. It's a form of bondage that most people never consciously recognize as such. Think about how it affects you on a daily basis. Before it ever touches your wallet, it wraps itself around your thoughts. You wake up in the morning, and within seconds, before you've even gotten out of bed, the weight is there. The awareness of what you owe, the anxiety about how you'll manage, the mental calculations that run on an endless loop in the background of every other thought you try to have. If this resonated with you, hit that like button. It helps this message reach others searching for the same breakthrough. From your mind, it moves into your emotions. That constant low-grade stress becomes so normal you forget what peace actually feels like. You become irritable, defensive, quick to react. Joy feels inaccessible, like something other people get to experience but not you, not right now, not until this gets resolved. And then it seeps into your sense of self. You start identifying with the struggle. You begin to see yourself as someone who's always behind, always scrambling, fundamentally lacking something that others seem to have figured out. This is the hidden dimension of financial struggle that no debt counselor will ever address with you. They'll help you with payment plans and budgets, and those things have their place. But they can't touch the spiritual chains that are actually running the show. Those chains affect every decision you make, who you believe you can become, what opportunities you allow yourself to pursue, even the relationships you think you deserve. The tragedy that plays out in millions of lives is this. People are genuinely trying. They're working double shifts, sacrificing time with their families, pushing their bodies past exhaustion, and yet the financial breakthrough never arrives. And the reason has nothing to do with their work ethic or intelligence. They're simply fighting a battle on the wrong terrain entirely. It's like showing up to a chess match with boxing gloves. All the effort in the world won't help if you're using the wrong tools for the challenge you're actually facing. Florence Scovel Shinn saw this pattern everywhere. People treating spiritual problems with purely physical solutions, trying to overcome invisible forces with visible strategies. And it never works, not in any lasting way. You can hustle yourself into an early grave, but if there's a spiritual blockage operating in your life, all that effort just gets absorbed into the void. The money comes in and immediately flows back out. The opportunity appears and then inexplicably vanishes. It's exhausting and demoralizing, and it's completely unnecessary once you understand what's really happening. The battlefield isn't your workplace or your budget spreadsheet. It's in the unseen realm where patterns get established before they ever show up in your physical experience. And the primary weapon you have access to in that realm isn't effort. It's your words. This might sound abstract until you really examine what's been coming out of your mouth on a daily basis. Most people have no idea they're actively creating their own limitation through the language they use casually, habitually, without a second thought. Every time you say, "I can't afford that," you're not just making an observation about your current bank balance. You're issuing a decree that shapes your future. You're sending a message into the universe about who you are and what's possible for you. And that message gets received and reflected back to you as continued lack. The same thing happens when you tell people, "I'm always broke," or "money just slips through my fingers," or any of the 1,000 variations of poverty consciousness that have become so normalized we don't even hear them anymore. These aren't harmless descriptions of temporary circumstances. They're creative declarations that actually strengthen the very pattern you're trying to escape. Your tongue carries a power that most people never tap into because they've been conditioned to see words as passive, as merely reflecting reality rather than actively constructing it. But the ancient wisdom that Florence Scovel Shinn studied makes this absolutely clear. Life and death, abundance and poverty, freedom and bondage, all of it is in the power of the tongue. This isn't metaphorical. It's mechanical. The universe responds to the frequency you broadcast, and your words are one of the primary ways you establish that frequency. When you speak lack, you align yourself with lack. When you speak limitation, you tune yourself to limitation. And then you wonder why nothing changes despite all your hard work. The answer is simple. You're building one thing with your hands while simultaneously tearing it down with your mouth. Once you understand that your words are actively constructing your experience, the entire approach to Psalm 112 shifts from religious ritual to strategic deployment of spiritual authority. This isn't about getting on your knees and begging the universe to maybe, possibly, if you're lucky enough, send some relief your way. That posture keeps you locked in victim consciousness, always hoping, always waiting for something external to rescue you. What Florence Scovel Shinn taught was radically different. She showed people how to step into their rightful position and claim what already belongs to them. When you speak this psalm over your life, you're not petitioning, you're declaring. There's a universe of difference between those two stances. One comes from a place of lack, of hoping you might be worthy enough to receive. The other comes from recognition of who you actually are and what's already been established in the spiritual realm concerning your provision. You're not trying to convince God to bless you. You're aligning yourself with the blessing that's already been allocated, removing the blockages that have kept you from accessing it. This is where most religious teaching goes completely off track. It trains people to approach the divine with their hat in their hand, grateful for whatever scraps might fall from the table, never daring to claim their full inheritance. But that's not what the ancient texts actually teach when you strip away centuries of misinterpretation. You're not a beggar. You're an heir. And heirs don't beg for what already belongs to them. They simply step into their rightful place and receive it. Your tongue becomes the instrument through which this shift happens, not through volume or repetition, but through alignment. When your words match the frequency of divine truth, when you speak with the kind of conviction that doesn't waver based on what your current circumstances look like, something tangible shifts in the atmosphere around your life. It's not invisible in the sense of being imaginary. It's invisible in the sense that it operates in a dimension you can't see with physical eyes. But the effects are absolutely measurable in the material world. Doors that have been locked for years suddenly swing open. Opportunities that should have gone to someone else somehow land in your lap. Resources that had no logical pathway to reach you find their way into your hands. People call this luck or coincidence because they don't understand the mechanics behind it. But what's actually happening is that you've shifted your position in the spiritual realm, and the physical realm is reorganizing itself to match that new alignment. Now, I want to go even deeper into how this mechanism actually functions, because understanding the behind-the-scenes process is what allows you to work with it consciously instead of accidentally. The impact of your declarations doesn't happen in some distant future. It begins the moment the words leave your mouth, setting forces in motion that operate according to laws most people never learn about. Type in the comments, "I claim my spiritual authority." What most people get wrong about this practice is thinking that more equals better. They assume if speaking Psalm 112 once is good, then saying it 10 times must be 10 times more powerful. But that's not how spiritual authority operates. It's not about volume or accumulation. It's about the quality of your alignment, the depth of your conviction in that single moment when you speak. One declaration made with absolute faith carries infinitely more power than 100 repetitions muttered with doubt running underneath. Florence Scovel Shinn was adamant about this because she'd seen people sabotage their own breakthrough by turning a powerful practice into anxious repetition. When you're constantly repeating something out of desperation, you're actually broadcasting the opposite message. You're saying you don't really believe it worked the first time, so you're trying to force it through sheer quantity. That frequency of doubt is what gets transmitted, and it blocks the very thing you're attempting to receive. The transformation happens through intentionality, not frequency. One focused, fully present declaration where you genuinely step into the truth of what you're speaking. That's what shifts reality. You're not trying to convince the universe or wear down some resistance through persistence. You're simply aligning yourself with a flow that's already there, positioning yourself to receive what's already been made available. And that positioning happens in a moment, in a decision, not through endless repetition. What's remarkable is how quickly the internal shift begins. Most people expect that if something is going to change their life, it should feel monumental, like lightning striking or the ground shaking beneath their feet. But the actual experience is almost anticlimactic in its subtlety. On that very first day, after you've spoken the psalm with genuine intention, there's this quiet sense of something releasing. It's not dramatic. You might not even notice it consciously at first, but there's a weight that's been sitting on your chest for so long you forgot it was there, and suddenly it's lighter. People describe it as an inexplicable peace that doesn't match their external circumstances. Their bank account hasn't changed yet. The bills are still sitting on the counter. Nothing in the visible world is different, but internally, something fundamental has shifted. That peace is the first signal that the spiritual atmosphere surrounding your finances is beginning to transform. It's evidence that your words landed, that the alignment happened, that forces are now moving on your behalf even though you can't see them yet. This initial shift is easy to dismiss or overlook, especially if you're still locked into thinking that only visible changes count. But what you're experiencing in that moment of peace is actually the most important part of the entire process. It's the foundation from which everything else builds. Because transformation always moves from the inside out, never the other way around. The external manifestation is just the final stage of a process that begins in the unseen realm. Write in the comments, "I feel the shift happening now." Once that internal foundation is established, the external world begins responding in ways that are impossible to explain through conventional logic. This usually happens around the second day, and the timing is so precise, so perfectly orchestrated, that trying to dismiss it as coincidence requires more faith than just accepting that something real is happening. You'll be going about your normal routine when your phone rings with a number you don't recognize. Normally you might ignore it, but something prompts you to answer. And it's someone offering exactly what you need: a job opportunity, a client you'd forgotten about, information that solves a problem you've been wrestling with. Or maybe you check your email and there's a message from someone you haven't heard from in years, and they're reaching out about something that directly addresses your current situation. These aren't vague signs you have to squint at and interpret. They're specific, tangible, perfectly calibrated to your circumstances in a way that feels almost eerie until you understand that this is how the universe operates once you've aligned yourself correctly. The help you need doesn't always look like you expected it to, but it arrives with a precision that leaves no doubt something beyond random chance is at work. What Florence Scovel Shinn observed across thousands of cases is that there's a rhythm to how manifestation unfolds. The internal shift happens first, establishing the new frequency. Then the external signs begin appearing, confirming that your alignment has been registered and forces are mobilizing on your behalf. And then, usually around the 5th day of consistent practice, tangible breakthrough starts materializing in ways you can measure and document. Debts that have haunted you for years suddenly find resolution through pathways that shouldn't exist. Maybe a creditor calls to say there was an error in the accounting and your balance is actually paid. Maybe you receive a refund from something you'd completely forgotten about and the amount is exactly what you needed. Job offers appear from directions you never thought to look. Money shows up from sources that make no logical sense. Old invoices that you'd written off as uncollectible suddenly get paid. Inheritances from distant relatives you barely knew. Insurance reimbursements you didn't know you qualified for. The pattern repeats itself with such consistency that once you've seen it enough times, you stop being surprised. What seemed impossible on day 1 becomes inevitable by day 5. And the beauty of it is that none of this requires you to figure out the how. You're not responsible for engineering the solutions or mapping out the pathway. Your only job is to maintain the alignment, to keep speaking the truth daily, and to stay open to receiving what comes through channels you couldn't have predicted. Now, I want to go even deeper into what's actually happening during this 5-day window, because understanding the mechanics of this transformation helps you recognize the signs when they appear and prevents you from second-guessing yourself back into the old pattern. The moment you speak with genuine conviction, not hope or wishful thinking, but actual alignment with truth, the response isn't delayed or conditional. It's immediate. This confuses people who've been taught that manifestation is a slow, gradual process requiring months or years of consistent work. But what Florence Scovel Shinn discovered is that the lag time we experience has nothing to do with how the universe operates. The delay exists only because of the interference pattern running in our own consciousness. The doubt, the contradictory beliefs, the underlying fear that it won't really work for us, even if it works for everyone else. When you finally cut through all that noise and speak from a place of pure alignment, the universe doesn't need time to process your request or deliberate on whether you're worthy. The laws governing manifestation are automatic, impersonal in the best possible sense. They respond to frequency, not to your history or your current bank balance or whether you've been good enough to deserve it. You're not manipulating reality or forcing something unnatural to happen. You're finally operating in harmony with principles that have existed long before you were born and will continue existing long after you're gone. What catches people off guard is realizing that the financial transformation, as significant as it is, actually represents the smallest part of what's shifting. The real revolution happens in your mindset, in the fundamental way you understand yourself and your relationship to the world around you. That constant undercurrent of fear that's been running in the background of every decision you make for years, it starts dissolving. Not because your circumstances have completely resolved yet, but because something deeper has changed in how you're relating to those circumstances. The anxiety that used to wake you at 3 a.m, the knot in your stomach every time you checked your bank account, the shame you felt when money came up in conversation, all of that begins losing its grip. And what replaces it isn't manic positivity or forced optimism. It's something much quieter and infinitely more powerful. It's an unshakable knowing that you're not a victim of random economic forces or bad luck or your own past mistakes. You're a co-creator, actively participating in the construction of your reality through principles you now understand and can work with consciously. This shift in identity is what makes the transformation permanent rather than temporary. You're not just experiencing a lucky break that might disappear as mysteriously as it arrived. You fundamentally altered your position in the spiritual realm, and from that new vantage point, abundance isn't something you chase or hope for. It's something that flows naturally because you've removed the blockages that were deflecting it away from you. The journey from scarcity consciousness to abundance consciousness doesn't happen through years of therapy or expensive seminars. It happens through consistent alignment with truth, which is exactly what speaking Psalm 112 daily accomplishes. Type in the comments, "I am a co-creator of my reality." Here's where so many people lose the thread without even realizing it. They hear about Psalm 112, they pull it up on their phone or flip to it in their Bible, And they read through it once or twice. Maybe they even read it aloud. And then they wonder why nothing happens, why their circumstances stay exactly the same. The problem isn't the psalm itself. It's that they approached it the same way they'd approach any other piece of text, scanning the words, processing the information, and moving on. That's casual reading, and casual reading produces casual results, which is to say, no results at all. What Florence Scovel Shinn taught was something entirely different. She was talking about intentional declaration, which requires a completely different quality of presence and engagement. When you declare something, you're not just acknowledging that the words exist. You're stepping into them, embodying them, speaking them as someone who fully expects them to manifest in the physical realm. There's conviction behind it, faith that doesn't waver based on what you currently see. One is religious routine, going through motions because you're supposed to or because you hope it might help. The other is deliberate alignment with divine truth, a conscious choice to position yourself in agreement with laws that govern how reality operates. The difference shows up immediately in the results. Routine produces nothing because there's no real power behind it, no genuine shift in frequency. Declaration, on the other hand, activates spiritual authority because you're engaging with the practice as a participant rather than a spectator. And that distinction matters more than almost anything else in this entire process. You cannot stand on the sidelines of your own transformation and expect breakthrough to happen to you. It doesn't work that way. The decision to change your financial reality begins the moment you stop observing and start engaging. This is why making a declaration, even a public one, carries such weight. When you type something in the comments or say something out loud to another person, you've crossed a threshold. You're no longer keeping this private, turning it over in your mind as a possibility you might explore someday when you feel ready. You've planted a flag, created accountability, put something concrete into the world that you can point back to and say, that's when I decided things would be different. That act of declaring creates a seed of expectation, and expectation is one of the most powerful forces in the manifestation process. People underestimate this step, thinking it's just symbolic or motivational. But what's actually happening is you're using your voice to establish your position in the spiritual realm, to announce your alignment with abundance rather than lack. The universe doesn't respond to your private thoughts nearly as powerfully as it responds to declarations made with conviction. Your voice carries creative authority that your internal dialogue simply doesn't possess. And when you make that declaration publicly, you're amplifying the signal, ensuring that it penetrates through any remaining doubt or hesitation. Write in the comments, I am fully engaged in my transformation. When you make that declaration, what you're really doing is drawing a line in the sand of your entire story. On one side of that line is everything that's been, every struggle, every sleepless night, every moment of panic when you opened the mail, every conversation you avoided because you were ashamed of your financial situation, every dream you shelved because it seemed impossibly out of reach. That's the old territory, the landscape you've been living in, sometimes for years, sometimes for your entire life. And on the other side of that line is what's coming, the breakthrough you're about to experience, the freedom that's already moving toward you, the version of yourself who looks back at this moment and marvels at how quickly everything changed. Your voice is what builds the bridge between those two realities. Not your hope, not your wishful thinking, not even your positive attitude. Your voice, speaking with intention and conviction, creates a pathway from where you are to where you're going. This isn't poetry or motivational language. This is describing an actual mechanism that operates whether you understand it or not. But when you do understand it, when you grasp what your voice is actually capable of accomplishing, you stop using it carelessly. You become strategic about what you speak over your life because you recognize that you're not just making noise, you're issuing commands that the universe is obligated to respond to. Florence Scovel Shinn spent decades documenting this phenomenon, watching people whose lives completely pivoted on the strength of declarations they made. These weren't extraordinary people with special gifts or unusual circumstances. They were ordinary individuals who discovered the hidden mechanism that drives every major shift anyone has ever experienced. The mechanism is this: your voice carries creative power that extends far beyond what your physical senses can detect or measure. When you speak with genuine alignment, you're not just producing sound waves that dissipate into the air. You're setting forces in motion in the unseen realm, forces that then work their way into manifestation in the physical world. Every major transformation you've ever heard about, every story of someone's life radically changing seemingly overnight, has this mechanism operating behind the scenes. They might not have known what they were doing. They might have stumbled into it accidentally through desperation or faith or sheer determination. But the principle is always the same. Words spoken with conviction create realities that didn't exist before. And the beautiful thing about spiritual laws is that they're not selective. They don't work for some people and fail for others based on worthiness or background or how many mistakes you've made. They work for whoever learns to apply them correctly. Now, I want to go even deeper into what actually happens in the moments after you speak Psalm 112, because there's an entire process unfolding that most people never see, and understanding this process helps you trust it even when the physical evidence hasn't caught up yet. Type in the comments, "My voice creates my future." The fact that you're here right now, reading these words, absorbing this teaching, that's not an accident of the algorithm or a random click that brought you to the wrong place. Divine timing doesn't operate on coincidence. When spiritual truth is ready to reach someone, when a person has arrived at that precise moment where they're finally prepared to receive what they've been searching for, the universe orchestrates the encounter. You didn't stumble onto this message. It found you. And it found you because there's already a shift happening in the spiritual realm concerning your finances, a movement that began before you even became conscious of it. Florence Scovel Shinn observed this pattern thousands of times, people showing up at exactly the right moment, not a day earlier when they would have dismissed the teaching as too strange or impractical, and not a day later when the opportunity might have passed. The timing is always perfect, even when it feels like you're discovering this information years too late. You're encountering it now because now is when you're ready to actually apply it, to move beyond intellectual understanding into genuine transformation. And transformation, real transformation, begins the instant spiritual truth connects with a receptive heart. What most people misunderstand about this journey is that it's not about recovering what you lost when debt took over your life. That version of yourself, the one barely keeping your head above water, struggling to make ends meet, that was never who you actually are. It was just a costume you wore for a while, a role you played because you didn't know any different. The real journey happening here is the recovery of your true identity, the recognition of who you were designed to be before the world convinced you that scarcity was your natural state. You were never meant to live in constant financial anxiety. You weren't created to spend your life avoiding phone calls from creditors or lying awake calculating which bill you can delay this month. That's not your identity. That's just a pattern you got caught in, possibly one that's been running in your family for generations. But patterns can be broken, and identities can be reclaimed. This teaching isn't a quick fix or a temporary band-aid. It's a strategic step in the recovery process, designed to help you remember who you actually are beneath all the conditioning and fear. Abundance isn't something foreign to your nature that you have to somehow achieve or earn. It's your birthright, the natural state you were meant to inhabit. Scarcity is the aberration, the distortion, the lie that got embedded so deep you started believing it was truth. And every time you speak Psalm 112 over your life, you're not just addressing your current financial problems. You're dismantling the false identity that's kept you trapped and stepping back into the truth of who you've always been underneath. Now, I want to go even deeper into the actual content of Psalm 112 itself, because when you understand what these ancient words are actually declaring over your life, the power intensifies exponentially. Put down in the comments, "I reclaim my true identity." Those tears you're crying right now over unopened bills, over the constant pressure, over feeling like you're failing everyone who depends on you, they're not going to last forever. In fact, they're already beginning their transformation. Within weeks, maybe even days, you'll find yourself crying again, but for a completely different reason. These will be tears of gratitude, of awe at what just happened, of relief so profound you can barely comprehend it. The financial shift is real, and it's coming. But what's even more significant is the identity shift that's happening simultaneously. You're moving from victim to victor, from someone things happen to, into someone who happens to things. From borrower to lender, from the person who always needs help to the person who has resources to offer others. From someone defined and limited by lack into someone marked and recognized by abundance. This isn't just a change in your bank balance. It's a complete reconstruction of how you see yourself and how the world responds to you. And that reconstruction reverberates through every area of your life, touching relationships, opportunities, even your physical health in ways you won't fully grasp until you're living it. What makes this moment even more powerful is understanding what you're actually breaking when you engage with this practice. Look back at your family history for a moment. Really examine the financial patterns that have played out across generations. Your grandparents struggled with money in their own way. Your parents had their version of the same battle. Maybe the details were different jobs, different debts, different circumstances, but the underlying theme is identical. Never quite enough. Always something unexpected draining the resources. Plans that seemed solid suddenly falling apart. This isn't genetic. You didn't inherit a poverty gene that determines your financial future. What's actually been passed down is a spiritual pattern, an invisible template that keeps recreating the same basic experience across different lifetimes and circumstances. The forms change. What was farm debt for one? Generation becomes credit card debt for another. What was medical bills for your parents becomes student loans for you. But the root remains identical. It's a spiritual chain of lack, a frequency that gets transmitted from parent to child, not through DNA but through proximity, through absorbed beliefs, through witnessing and internalizing the same fearful relationship with money. This cycle repeats itself automatically, generation after generation, until someone in the family line finally recognizes it for what it is and makes the deliberate decision to break it. That someone is you. Right here, right now, you're not just addressing your personal debt. You're ending a pattern that's been running in your bloodline for longer than you know. And when you break it for yourself, you're simultaneously breaking it for everyone who comes after you. Your children, their children, descendants you'll never meet who will live in freedom because you had the courage to interrupt the cycle. Write in the comments, "The generational curse ends with me." You've experienced this so many times, you probably stopped counting. You finally managed to save a little money, maybe $500 in your emergency fund, and you feel that brief moment of relief. Then within days, sometimes within hours, the car breaks down, or the water heater dies, or your child needs something urgent for school, and the amount needed is always just slightly more than what you saved, forcing you to dip into credit again. The timing is too precise, too consistent, too perfectly calibrated to be dismissed as bad luck or coincidence. This is spiritual resistance manifesting in the natural realm. There's an invisible force working to keep you locked in the cycle of lack, and it operates with surgical precision. It waits until you're gaining momentum, until you're starting to believe that maybe things really are turning around. And then it strikes. Not randomly, but strategically, at the exact moment. That will cause maximum discouragement and reinforce the belief that you'll never get ahead no matter what you do. Most people experience this pattern for years, sometimes decades, and never recognize it for what it actually is. Evidence that there's a spiritual dimension to their financial struggle that purely practical solutions can't touch. Florence Scovel Shinn used a powerful illustration to help people grasp this concept. She said, trying to build wealth without addressing the spiritual root of lack is exactly like trying to fill a jar that has holes in the bottom. You can pour and pour. You can work yourself into exhaustion pouring more water into that jar. You can sacrifice everything, hustle until your health breaks, find every possible source of income, but it doesn't matter how much you add. It's all going to drain right back out through those holes. The problem was never the amount of water. The problem is the integrity of the container itself. This is why so many genuinely hardworking people feel trapped in an endless loop. They make progress and then lose it. They get ahead and then fall behind. They pay off one debt only to watch another appear. It's not because they're doing anything wrong in the practical sense. It's not because they lack discipline or intelligence or work ethic. It's because there are holes in their spiritual container, leaks that have been there possibly for generations, and everything they earn keeps draining through them before they can actually benefit from it. Until you patch those holes, until you address the fundamental spiritual issue, the cycle continues indefinitely. You can attend every financial seminar, read every book, follow every expert's advice, and still find yourself right back where you started. The breakthrough doesn't come from learning better strategies. It comes from fixing what's broken at the root level, in the unseen realm, where these patterns first take hold before they ever show up as numbers on a statement. Now, I want to go even deeper into how Psalm 112 actually functions as the patch for these holes. Because understanding this changes how you approach the entire practice and dramatically increases the impact it has on your life. Put down in the comments, "I'm patching the holes today." What you're dealing with has a name in ancient scripture, and understanding this changes everything about how you approach your financial struggle. It's called the devourer, and this isn't poetic language or symbolic imagery meant to make a sermon more interesting. Florence Scovel Shinn recognized, through years of study and observation, that there's an actual spiritual entity operating with a specific assignment: to consume what belongs to you before you can benefit from it. Money, yes, but not just money. Peace, opportunities, relationships, health, joy, anything that would contribute to your abundance and well-being gets targeted for destruction. The precision you've been experiencing, the way financial setbacks always seem to arrive at the worst possible moment, that's not the universe being randomly cruel or fate playing tricks on you. It's a spiritual assignment being carried out with deliberate intent. The devourer doesn't show up haphazardly. It watches, it waits, and it strikes when the impact will be most devastating, when it can reinforce the lie that you're destined for perpetual lack. This is why conventional financial advice, no matter how sound, can't produce lasting breakthrough on its own. You're not just fighting against economic circumstances. You're contending with an invisible force that has been given permission, through patterns and agreements you didn't even know you'd made, to consume your provision. But here's the revelation that shifts the entire battle in your favor. This assignment doesn't have ultimate authority. In Malachi, Scripture makes an extraordinary declaration. God himself says he will rebuke the devourer for your sake. Not might rebuke, not will consider it if you're worthy enough. Will rebuke. Present tense, already established, non-negotiable. The provision is already made. The victory has already been won in the spiritual realm. What's been missing is someone on earth with enough faith to speak that victory into manifestation, to stand in their authority and enforce what heaven has already decreed. This is where most believers get stuck. They read promises like this and think they're beautiful ideas, inspiring concepts to hold on to during hard times, but they never actually activate them. They never step into their position as enforcers of divine decree. They wait for God to do something he's already done, while he's waiting for them to exercise the authority he's already given. You're not asking God to fight the devourer on your behalf. He's already announced his intention to do so. What you're doing when you speak Psalm 112 is agreeing with that intention, aligning yourself with it, and authorizing its manifestation in your specific circumstances. Now, I want to go even deeper into what actually happens when you make this declaration, because there's a sequence of spiritual events that unfolds the moment you speak with genuine authority, and understanding this sequence helps you recognize the signs that your breakthrough is already in motion. The invisible barriers operating in your life right now are so subtle, so deeply embedded in the fabric of your daily experience, that you've probably stopped noticing them altogether. They've been there so long they feel like just the way things are, like the natural order of your reality. But these blockages aren't natural at all. They're spiritual constructs, invisible walls that have been diverting your prosperity away from you. Sometimes for your entire life, sometimes for generations before you were even born. The impact is absolutely devastating, even though you can't see the mechanism causing it. Think about how water flows. If there's a barrier in the stream, the water doesn't just stop, it gets redirected. It goes around the obstacle, following a different path entirely. That's exactly what's been happening with the abundance meant for you. It's not that prosperity doesn't exist or that you're somehow excluded from it. It's that there are blockages in your spiritual atmosphere redirecting it away from you before it can reach your hands. Money flows towards you and then mysteriously gets diverted at the last moment. Opportunities come close and then inexplicably go to someone else. Resources that should have been yours end up somewhere else, and you're left wondering what you did wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. You've been living with invisible barriers you didn't create and didn't know how to dismantle. But here's where everything shifts. When you speak Psalm 112 with genuine understanding, not just reading words, but comprehending the spiritual authority you're wielding, you're doing something far more powerful than most people realize. You're releasing spiritual energy into the atmosphere around your life. Your voice isn't just making noise. It's creating sound waves that carry authority, that penetrate the unseen realm where these blockages exist, that literally rearrange the spiritual furniture to align with divine order. Florence Scovel Shinn described it as speaking light into darkness. The barriers that have been operating invisibly can't withstand exposure to truth spoken with conviction. They begin to dissolve, to break apart, to lose their power to divert what belongs to you. And as they crumble, you start experiencing something you might not have felt in years. A sense that things are finally flowing in your direction instead of away from you. The obstacles that seemed permanent suddenly feel temporary. The walls that appeared solid start developing cracks. This isn't gradual erosion that takes decades. When you engage with this practice correctly, the dismantling happens quickly, sometimes shockingly so. The revelations come fast. The shifts occur in days rather than years. And what you thought would require a lifetime of struggle resolves itself in ways that leave you speechless. Now, I want to go even deeper into the actual words of Psalm 112, because when you understand what each phrase is declaring over your life, the transformation intensifies in ways that go beyond anything we've discussed so far. Write in the comments, invisible barriers are breaking now. Here's what most people fundamentally misunderstand about wealth and provision. They think it starts in the physical realm, that prosperity begins with a job or a business opportunity or an inheritance. But that's backwards. Everything you see manifesting in the material world is simply the final stage of a process that began long before in the invisible realm. All prosperity, every bit of abundance that shows up in your bank account, originates in the unseen first. The spiritual always precedes the natural. Always. What you're experiencing financially right now is just the physical reflection of what's already been established in the invisible world. This is why trying to fix your money problems through purely physical means produces such limited results. You're working at the wrong end of the process. You're attempting to change the reflection in the mirror without addressing what's creating that reflection in the first place. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that if you want different results in the visible realm, you have to shift what's happening in the invisible realm first. And the fastest way to create that shift is through aligning yourself with the frequency of abundance rather than continuing to broadcast the frequency of lack. Everything in existence operates at a specific frequency, a vibrational rate that determines what it attracts and what it repels. This isn't mystical nonsense. It's physics applied to the spiritual dimension. Every thought you think Every emotion you feel, every belief you carry, is vibrating at a particular frequency. Fear vibrates low and heavy. Faith vibrates high and light. Worry, anxiety, desperation, all of these operate at frequencies that actually repel prosperity even as you're desperately trying to attract it. You're broadcasting one signal while hoping for a completely different result, and it doesn't work that way. Your financial reality responds to the dominant frequency you're broadcasting moment by moment, day after day. If that frequency is rooted in fear and lack consciousness, if you're constantly thinking thoughts like, "I'll never have enough," or "things never work out for me," then you're tuned to a station that only plays scarcity. No amount of hard work can override that signal. But when you speak Psalm 112 with genuine conviction, something remarkable happens instantly. Your frequency shifts, not gradually over weeks or months, but immediately, in that very moment. The vibration you're emitting changes from lack to abundance, from fear to faith, from victim consciousness to victor consciousness. This shift creates an immediate change in what you're magnetically attracting into your experience. Opportunities that were invisible to you at the old frequency suddenly become visible. Resources that were flowing past you start flowing toward you. People who can help you appear seemingly out of nowhere. The external world hasn't changed. You've changed your position within it. And from this new vantage point, everything looks different. Now, I want to go even deeper into the specific words of Psalm 112 and what each phrase is actually accomplishing when you speak it over your life. Because this is where the practice moves from theory into tangible, undeniable transformation. Put down in the comments, "I'm shifting my frequency now." The moment you understand that you're not fighting this battle with natural weapons, everything changes. Scripture tells us that the weapons of our warfare are mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. And most people read that without grasping what it actually means in practical terms. You're not limited to the tools the financial system offers: payment plans, debt consolidation, credit counseling. Those have their place, but they're natural weapons trying to combat spiritual fortresses. And here's the truth.